Now we've got data journalist and the host of the Substack Strength in Numbers, Elliott Morris. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey, thanks, Brian.
So I want to dig into what we saw yesterday. Obviously, we had a few elections, Wisconsin and Florida. So what does the Democratic overperformance look like, and what does that tell us more broadly about the political environment that we're in right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. These special elections and off-year elections are helpful because they can point us to trends we might see in the midterms. So it's a good thing to focus on. In Florida, we saw two congressional district special elections last night to fill districts that were vacated. In the first district, there is a 16 percentage point overperformance for Democrats. So what that means is that Donald Trump won one of those districts by 30 points last year. And the Republican candidate only won by 14 last night. So that's a 16-point swing in that district. In the next one, there was a 22-point shift, and that was in a redder district, Florida's first congressional district. So what we're seeing here,
which is Matt Gaetz's former district, by
Matt
the way.
Gaetz's former district. That's right. The other one is vacated by Mike Waltz. So what we're seeing here is that there's some change in the electorate. Either people are changing their mind against the administration. We can talk about why. Or Republicans aren't turning out as much as they were previously, or some combination of the two. We also saw this last night in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, where Susan Crawford beat Brad Schimmel by about 10 points in the final count, which is also an 11-point shift from 2024 when Kamala Harris lost it by 1 point. So in the Wisconsin race, more Republican precincts in the state had much lower turnout. So those Republicans, we think, are just tuning out from the electorate, giving Democrats the ability to do well. And even in Democratic areas, the Democrats and liberal candidates are overperforming.
And how did those relate to what we saw last week? I know we don't have a lot of data points here, but we do have Florida and Wisconsin yesterday. Last week, we had two special elections in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is generally a pretty good state to glean some information from because it's a battleground state.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, at this point, we have data from both battlegrounds, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And in this Pennsylvania district, I believe Senate District 36, that's the state legislative district, the Democratic candidate also did 16 points better than Kamala Harris did in 2024. So we have data from those swing districts. And then we also have data from a very, very red districts in a red state, Florida. And they're all showing the same thing, which is a combination of Republicans tuning out from politics, tuning out from supporting the administration. I mean, if they don't vote, like you can say maybe they'll vote next time, but they're not voting. And that's the important thing right now. And that's the important thing for the midterms. And then you also see independents and Democrats moving even more supportive of left-leaning candidates. So that should portend pretty good Democratic performance for 2026 if that holds.
Right, and that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the prospect of Democratic overperformance in midterms. What can we learn from 2018? Because we were in a not dissimilar situation back in 2018. These special elections in the lead up to that first midterm when Republicans had full control of government, Trump had the White House, Republicans ran the Senate and the House. And obviously Democrats won the House by the biggest margin in modern American history. That was 41 seats. And so are we seeing similar trends right here in 2025 as we head toward midterms now?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that are similar and a couple of things that are different. On the similarities, those numbers I was telling you, that swing from 2024 to 2025, it's about 11 points in all the special elections that have happened across the country. So again, it was 16 points last night. It's 11 points on average.
Okay.
That number was 10 points from 2016 to the special elections held in 2018. So the sample size is small. There's only been about a dozen of these special elections so far. But if that number stays at about the double-digit mark, then overall change in public opinion from the last presidential election to right now in an off year is about the same as it was in Donald Trump's first presidency. So that would indicate, yeah, Democrats are fired up and Republicans are tuning out at the same rate. There is a really important difference, though, and that is that the electorates are very different now. There's much higher education polarization with educated voters, those with college degrees moving towards Democrats and those without moving towards Republicans. And that's created this sort of dual electorate that, in the country that I like to call it, where you have one electorate that shows up in presidential years about 70%, 75% of registered voters voting. And then you have the electorate that tunes in for special elections, for state Supreme Court races in the off year, where about 50% of registered voters vote. And that 25% you're missing, those seem to be Republicans. If that continues, then you can't really map these trends onto the next presidential race, but they still portend good Democratic performance in a low turnout midterm.
You had said something that caught my attention, and that was the difference between whether these Republicans are just not turning out or whether we're seeing Republicans and or independents change their minds. Is there any information yet to suggest which one that is, or do we have any indication as to when we will kind of get that information? Because I feel like, look, from an activist persuasion standpoint, that's going to be really important to figure out whether we're actually changing hearts and minds or if we're just kind of relying on an unpopular president. We'll talk about that in just a moment, not being able to turn out his voters just because of tamped down enthusiasm. But really that's a Band-Aid right now for Democrats. That's not going to help the Democratic broader effort to bring these people back into the tent. And we do have to think about, high turnout elections, general elections that we have to win. And if folks aren't just turning out like in midterms, it doesn't mean that we've got them. It just means that they're not turning out in these special elections.
Yeah. Look, for like the strategists, the Democratic campaigners out there, it's both. It's both people tuning out of the election. We know that because turnout is lower in more Republican areas, both across districts and within states and within counties, with more Republican precincts seeing higher drop-off in votes relative to 2024. But those decreases in turnout do not explain the entire shift in these results from 2024 to 2025. So there's some persuasion happening as well, some backlash to the new Trump administration, to Elon Musk, which we should mention for Wisconsin. He really put himself out there for Wisconsin, and they appeared to have decided against his favor. There's some mobilization against that.
Okay.
I think we'll probably end up seeing a split from about 70 or 80% turnout related to 20 to 30% persuasion related. We don't have that data yet. It'll take at least a few months to get the good voter file data on this, those records of who actually have actually voted. But even a 20 or 30% attribution to changing persuasion is enough for Democrats to win the House and potentially to win the presidency if that holds through to 2028.
Can you talk about Elon Musk's popularity and whether it was a mistake or how much of a mistake it was to have him be the face of the Republican effort to win in Wisconsin?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think it is probably a growing liability for Republicans, and it seems like they're noticing this. There was some reporting in the Daily Beast out yesterday with Republicans in close competitive races saying they were hoping for a blowout in Wisconsin so that they could make the case that he's sort of toxic to Republican efforts. And the polling data suggests that he is. So one of the last pieces I wrote at 5:38 at ABC News was a comparison of the popularity of all of the different policy actions by the Trump administration in the first month. So from January 21st to February 21st. When we looked at that, we could see, these polls ask Americans, do you support the president's actions on Israel, on the Gulf of Mexico, or, whatever? And do you support the government cutting funding for Medicaid or Medicare or shutting down NOAA or the NHS? And we found that in questions that asked about things related to Elon Musk's doings in the government, he was underwater by 7 percentage points, which is at that point was 10 points less popular than Donald Trump's approval rating. At that point, slightly positive. So we could say maybe he's a 10-point drag on this administration. And if you look at his current approval rating, that's about true as well. So Donald Trump's approval rating today is about -2. So 47% approve and 49% disapprove of him. And Elon Musk is closer to -12 or -13. So, I think we have enough polling data, and now we have the electoral data to say he's not good for Republican prospects. People don't like him. They don't like what he's doing in the government. Like, people like spending programs, so they're not going to like the guy who's taking away spending programs.
Right. Let's talk about Trump's approval rating a little bit, because he came into office very, very defiantly with a net positive approval rating. It was the first time he had a net positive approval rating since he's been in office, inclusive of his first term, if I'm not mistaken, but correct me if I'm wrong. What is the significance then of the flip that we've seen thus far? And what's the main driver of that?
Yeah, it's true that Trump started with his most popular rating ever. He was around +5 in my average of polls published on my Substack, for the record, when he took office. But it's important to note that is the second lowest starting approval rating for any modern president, going back to when we first had polls in 1935. So yeah, he's doing better, but that's setting the bar literally at its lowest
Right.
point.
It's just he's doing better
Yeah.
relative to the least popular president who's ever been in office.
That's
So
right. That's right. So he started at around +2 previously, and at this point in his first term, he was at around -10. He's at -3 today. Yeah, sure, that's better. But a -3 approval rating still gets you, a loss in the midterms, loss of political capital when you're trying to move government policy, general polarization against the incumbent party. So I'm not sure it's really buying him much to be more popular.
do you think that the Republican Party more broadly is going to suffer? Because look, he's a lame duck president, and so I know this is more of a political question than a data driven one. But is there any data to indicate whether the political party would suffer at the hands of a president who isn't running for re-election? Like, is the Republican base more broadly able to differentiate? Okay, yes, we have an unpopular president, but I still want Republican elected officials in office who kind of espouse the same agenda, espouse the same beliefs as him, or is backlash against Trump by virtue of his underwater approval rating going to also drag down the rest of the party who is running for re-election?
Yeah, well, the problem for Republicans right now is that Donald Trump is one of their most popular figures. If in a YouGov poll, for example, that asked people in February whether or not they viewed Trump, JD Vance, Musk, and the Republican Party just generally as favorable or unfavorable, Donald Trump was at -5. JD Vance is less popular at -8. And the Republican Party is underwater by double digits. So if they're banking on, like Mitch McConnell or Mike Johnson to shore up the party's reputation, they're going to have a bad time. Trump is their most popular figure, despite all the caveats about that popularity. So I don't expect them to move away from Trump, the man.
Right, right. But I do want to talk about another YouGov poll, and that was that the majority of Americans actually think that the Signalgate scandal, where Mike Waltz added Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic into the Signal chat, which already unto itself was irresponsible because that is an unsecured commercial app, and then of course having a journalist watch along as they did war planning, Americans, primed by a Republican Party that spent the better part of a decade doing fainting spells about the danger of speaking on an unsecured server as it relates to Hillary Clinton. Obviously, they didn't like that. Can you talk about the findings of that poll for Signalgate, especially as they relate to Hillary Clinton's previous issues with email servers back in 2022 and 2015?
Yeah, so YouGov asked U.S. adults, a representative sample of them, whether or not they believed Signalgate, this sharing of classified war plans over Signal, inviting a journalist, whether or not they thought it was very serious, somewhat serious, not so serious, or not at all. And 53% of Americans said it was very serious, and 74% said it was either very serious or somewhat serious. And that includes majorities of every party, Democrats, independents, and Republicans. So clearly this is something that they care about, and that should be motivating more than like one news cycles of coverage. Americans want some level of accountability for this. In the comparison, so YouGov also, because they've been around for a while, was able to ask the same exact question about Hillary Clinton's use of an unclassified private server for her emails in 2015, right when the scandal broke. And at the time, 30% of Americans, just 1/3, said that her use of that private server was very serious. So 30% for Clinton in 2015 versus 53% for the Trump administration's Signalgate in 2025, 10 years later. Oh, wow, I can't believe that was 10 years ago. There's like arguably, you could say, based on this, that people think this was a more significant sort of violation of public law. Indeed, 48% of adults in the YouGov survey think that this Signalgate violated the law. And in 2015, only 41% of Americans think Hillary Clinton broke the law. Like, again, the law is not a matter of debate for public opinion, but just in
Yeah.
terms of the severity here, people think this is clearly more serious.
Right. And again, the irony of all of this is that they probably wouldn't have thought Signalgate was as serious if not for the fact that they were primed by this Republican Party to think that using unsecured servers to conduct government business, if they weren't primed to think that it was the biggest national security lapse, like some major issue, thanks to the Republican Party themselves. And so one might think that would have been a good impetus to have a little bit better security when you're doing war planning. But alas, here we are. Finally, let's finish off with this. I'm curious what issues you think that from a persuasion standpoint that Democrats should lean into. Obviously, the prevailing knowledge up to now is like Republicans are really strong on immigration and the economy. Even Trump himself said that he likely won based on the fact that, he was able to lean in on those two issues in particular. And so I'm curious now what you think have become the most potent issues for Democrats to be able to exploit as we head toward 2026.
Yeah, I think the big one is the economy. I think Trump is right. I think he won in 2024 because of high inflation and perceived slow economic growth under the Biden administration. I think he's totally right. The political science backs that up. The polls back that up. So it's worth noting that the economy now is shrinking at a higher rate than it was before he took office. That's the stock market, the hard data on imports, on manufacturing growth, retail sales, et cetera, the job market. If voters are consistent, which to be fair is an if, he should be punished for that. And the polling data suggests that he is being punished for that. So before Trump took office, he had an edge on the question of which party people trust more to handle the economy. Now he has no edge. And in fact, he's 10 points underwater on the issue of the economy. If when pollsters ask, do you approve of the job the president is doing on X or Y, this time being the economy, and that's worse than his overall approval rating of -2. So this is not an issue that Trump has ground on anymore. And just based again on the traditional political science theories, I would expect Democrats to take advantage of that. But I will say, look, midterms are mostly about backlash to the party, regardless of what the issue landscape looks like. There's as close to a gravitational force in politics as you can get for a decrease in seats in the House in the midterm after a president takes office. So with the average seat loss being in the double digits, where Republicans can afford to lose one seat or two seats to retain their majority. So it's very likely Democrats take back the House next year. It's really only a question of how large. And I expect if they focused on these issues that were so motivating to voters in 2024, and if they focus on the excesses of the Trump administration's sort of remaking of government and cutting of funding, if that indeed ends up happening with things like Medicare, and Social Security, then they would be in pretty good shape. And honestly, this analysis does not seem that hard. This one seems pretty clear cut.
Well, from your lips to God's ears at this point. So, Elliott, thank you so much for the time. For those watching right now, if you want to support Elliott's work, you can check out his Substack, Strength in Numbers. Thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.